Welcome, everybody, to today's book launch. My name is Kathy Smith, and I'm so excited to be here to talk about this book. I was able to experience some of the things firsthand and in person that are in the book, and it was an experience of a lifetime for me, and that's why I wanted to host this launch, but more about that later. We're anxious for you to dive in with us as we introduce the book. A book that is captivating, humorous, stretching, exciting, and informative. A book that introduces us to day-to-day life that most of us will never experience. A challenging life, to say the least. But a book about a calling and the person who answered the call. Joining us today is the incredibly talented author, Leoma here to talk about her latest book, Life in a Tumble Dryer, Living and Working in Khartoum, the world's hottest capital. This book promises to captivate and inspire readers. Leoma, will you give those who are watching and may not know you or may not have read any of your books or experiences just a little bit of a background information about who you are and why in the world you'd find yourself experiencing a life that would lead you to write Launching Life in a Tumble Dryer? And let me just say, it was the hottest place I have ever been. Also, tell us how in the world you remembered so many of the details and stories to write this book.
Thank you, Kathy. It's been a journey for sure. I joined Wycliffe Bible Translators and SIL International back in 1979 and ended up leaving for Africa in 1982 in January. And so the first book of this series, which the series is not how I planned it because I never planned to do any of this. I was going to be a speech therapist and behave myself and be a normal person in America. But God had other ideas. And so I launched into the unknown. That was the first book. And it goes from, well, kind of the beginning of life. And, I was born at a very early age, that kind of thing, up until 1996. And then the Tumble Dryer book starts in 1989 and goes to 1996. And then 1996 to 7 and on to 2004 will be the third book when I was teaching with university. How I remembered all these details, one, I'm a storyteller, what can I say? But I never felt like I really had a chance to tell my stories to my family. That just didn't seem the right time, the right something. And so I thought, well, maybe this way they'll read the book and they'll find out what I've been up to. Fortunately, I had written to my parents every week. And so my mother, being the excellent secretary that she was, kept those letters. And so I have a whole file drawer full of letters that I wrote to them. And so it's wonderful now that I can go back and read those and remember a lot of things that I certainly don't remember otherwise. So that's kind of how we got here.
Thanks, Leoma. Also joining us today are a few other special guests who bring their own unique insights and experiences to today's conversation. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves to each of you.
Karen, would you like to start?
Yes, my name is Karen Klumpner, and I live in Bellingham, Washington now, but I know Leoma briefly because I met her mother when I moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee, some 50 years ago almost. And I was always interested in what she was doing because I also spent time overseas, but never in Africa. I was in Lebanon for a number of years where I learned and got my feet wet about different things in mission work. and then spent 8 years teaching in the country of China, which was a totally different and new experience for me. But what I especially love about Leoma's writings, both her first book about launching into the deep and this one about life in a tumble dryer, is her wonderful dry humor that comes through in almost every section. She sees the joyful and the funny ness in so many situations that we find when we're overseas, and maybe we're not understanding everything and they certainly aren't understanding us, and it comes through very clearly and is such fun to read and to see the way in which Leoma was able to navigate this difficult terrain, especially in her work with the linguistics and translations that were very difficult. I loved where she described in one short incident how people on one side of a street in the village spoke one kind of dialect, and the ones on the other side of the very same street spoke another dialect and had trouble understanding each other and would fight. Oh, that's so true among people, isn't it? And I think it's a good illustration of what's happening around the world. So I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I recommended the first book to my friends, and it was quickly snatched up and enjoyed by a number of them. And these are friends from my church, but also friends that I meet in book clubs here in Bellingham and in other locales, because it's easy to read and it's enjoyable and it's so informative, as Kathy told us in the introduction. We can learn a great deal about what life in Sudan must have been like, and today it's so much worse in many places. So thank you for the privilege of being here and being able to talk about this book, and I heartily recommend it to anybody who enjoys a good read. Thank you.
It's the strangest thing, because Aunt Frances was going to go and visit Leoma. She didn't want to travel by herself. This was when she was in Khartoum, and this would be the third book, by the way, when I was getting there, not during this time. But so Aunt Frances and I were going to travel together. And she wanted to go through Egypt, do a tour of Egypt. And so she planned all of this wonderful trip with guides and cars and places to stay. And we were going to get on the airplane and go to Khartoum first, though. And then on our way back, we were going to stop in Egypt and do this big. And then she couldn't go. She was having health issues that she just didn't feel safe traveling to a country where there wasn't much medical. And to be honest, none of her family felt safe in her doing so either. So I went by myself. I'd never traveled internationally before. That was before I started gallivanting. That was kind of my baptism by fire, I think. Except she had all these plans. I mean, I was taken care of like I was a little old lady, not like I actually was at the time. Now I would qualify. But anyway, so I got to Khartoum, and it was interesting getting off the plane at the airport. It was in the middle of the night, of course, because that's when you get there, is in the middle of the night. And so I kind of wandered around and eventually found my way out to where the Leoma was. And we got in the car, and the first thing she said was, after we greeted each other, hugs and all that kind of stuff. And so we got in the car, we're going back. She said, now watch for soldiers along the way, because if they wave us down, we have to stop. And if we don't stop, they may shoot at us. Well, that was reassuring. So we're going around this little go-around that she describes in the book, one of those really nice. Well, you understand that the Sudanese people are very black, and their soldiers wear a dark uniform. And there was no light anywhere. And I didn't see the soldier standing by the side of the road until I saw his eyes as we drove by him. And I'm saying, Leoma, there was a soldier standing there. And she said, well, he didn't shoot at us, so I guess it's okay. And we continued on our way. Well, okay, fine. And no big deal. So we're driving down this road, and the first thing I noticed was they didn't have any barrels. They never had barrels. Like if there was pavement that was disturbed or they were doing some work, they didn't have a barrel out there. They might have a rock sitting between you and the huge hole along the side of the road, but there were no barrels anywhere. In Tennessee, I don't know about your part of the United States, but barrel storage is well known along the highways there. And they've got more barrels than they could say Chuck Rice over. So anyway, but no barrels. That was the first thing I noticed. And no street lights. And I'm looking and watching around. And in front of us, I see there's this whole bank of eyes going all across the street. And I go, Leoma, there's something in front of us. Way down there. She said, what do you? I said, there are a lot of eyes in front of us. And she said, oh, okay. And so she just continues driving. And pretty soon we saw horns. And it was a whole herd of long-horned cattle being driven down the middle of the street. And Leoma just kind of kept going slowly, and they went by us. And here came the herders with their long sticks, and everybody waved. We waved. And we went on, So, okay. Now, then we got to the street where she was staying was this lovely house inside a compound. And it was kind of had a big plaza in front, and you had a guard at the gate, and he opened at the gate, and we drove in, and they shut the gate. And so we went in and just went to bed that night. And I was wiped out, as you are after a long flight like that. And I can remember lying in bed and listening to hear if I heard soldiers marching. Don't ask me why. I just was convinced that the soldiers were going to get us because I'm a heathen or whatever. But anyway, it was all. But that was kind of my introduction to life outside the United States. And it was I was so humbled by their generosity, by their hospitality, by their willingness to welcome the stranger and make them feel comfortable.
At Leoma, it's been what now, 3 years, I believe. We were in the Women in Publishing Summit, which is this conference for writers, and we were put together in a pod group, and we've been meeting ever since. So, it's been wonderful getting to know Leoma, and we all talk about our journey of, becoming authors. I mean, Leoma has already published many books, so she's well, into the process. But for me, I was starting out, and it's just been wonderful getting to know her, hearing her stories. And it's funny, so when I read her books, because I read the first one as an ARC reader, and then the second one, I was going to do the ARC, but it came right out as I was starting my teaching for the school year, and everything was upside down, so I wasn't able to read it then. But when the book finally came out and I was able to buy it finally, I enjoyed reading it. It's just a wonderful read. But it's funny because sometimes I'll read a story and I remember a story she told me, and I'm like, wait, was that in the book or did Leoma tell me that? So, but I found the book. It's always such a wonderful read because now Harriet, I have you as a visual because it's always Dear Harriet for everything. So I love that. Now I have a face with the name, and I just found the book just to be amazing in terms of the journey that Leoma had and what she endured and never gave up and never once was like, I'm out of here. It was always oh, well, we'll just fix it, So, um, with every episode and every story, I was just like, oh, I would have left. I would have gone. I mean, but she's like, nope, we'll just fix it. It's fine. So it just shows the perseverance, and I have such a level of respect for Leoma for being able to do what she did for as many years as she did, and then this time period and dealing with the heat and the dust storms, and the one that I forget what you call it, where it was the black sand that it made it into nighttime. And I mean, that had to be like terrifying but amazing at the same time, where it goes from sunny to, pitch black. um every time you mentioned the bugs, I was like, oh, any kind of bug story. It always got me. But I think the one time which just shows the level of perseverance was when you talked about making those 500 copies of the transition book, and everything that you had to go through to make a book. And I was like, I reread that section a few times because I was like, wait, what? She did what? And so that to me, I found it amazing that you did that. I mean, that's where it shows the passion, the perseverance. But then the thing that made me laugh the most was when you talked about how when you were living in the spots where, say, the power was only on for a couple hours, that no matter what time of day, you'd pop up and do laundry and iron and cook, and and then you go back to bed. So now it made me laugh because I'm like, 2 a.m. gotta go, so. But again, it just shows the level of, perseverance, and your willingness, and not to give up and quit. You're just like, that. It is what it is. I'm just going to do it.
Right.
So that's what I found, just really refreshing in this book, to see your level of perseverance and the way you just kept on keeping on. So thank you for sharing your stories, and I look forward to the rest of these books.
Thank you. Thank you. Who's next?
I'm Rebecca Locklear. I'm out here in Oregon. I'm another writer, educational writer. Um, I enjoyed reading Launching into the Unknown because, probably like you, Lisa, I'm a teacher, and I taught overseas in an Islamic country. And so some of the things that she mentioned, I was going, oh, I remember something like that, right? Or something that we did. But it just brought back all these memories of being overseas, like in a third world country, and what that means. Uh, and I think when I shared this with other missionaries that I know, particularly, and other people in the Bible translating people, they just gobbled it up because it's something they can really connect with. Um, and I also like the fact that you just mentioned that your mother had saved your letters, because that's how we communicated back then. And I know when my mother passed away, I'm originally from Cape Cod, so and I went back to Cape Cod. I was there for a week to clean out the house and never really got it all done. But I did come across a stack of letters, and they were letters my mother, every one of them I ever wrote to her. But I wasn't thinking at that time, and I just went, oh, I'll just kind of toss these out. After I noticed there was a letter there where I wrote to my mother that this young man asked me to marry him. So, we didn't call because it was too expensive back then. So I wrote to my mother. Anyway, I kind of threw those all out. And now I think, it would have been so cool to think about how I was thinking, as I was growing up. So I'm so glad you have those letters, because that's really great. But it's very interesting to see how you navigated through your life in Launching into the Unknown. And I look forward to this next book.
Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Susan Smith, and I am in Knoxville, Tennessee, where Leoma and Kathy both are. I know Leoma through a Bible study that we are in together, and I've had the privilege of reading her first book as well, and the second book, Life in a Tumble Dryer. And it's been very fascinating to me to get to know Leoma and to understand a little bit better about her heart for Bible translation, for language, for going to a third world country to help people write their language so that they can learn how to read the Bible. Just the book has fascinated me in terms of all the, I don't know if you'd call them anecdotal stories, but just trying to understand a little bit better about what life is like on a day-to-day basis in Sudan, and what it takes to get through a day, from getting up in the morning to going to bed at night to dealing with rationing, to dealing with money, to dealing with dust storms, to dealing with food, learning how women are treated, a little bit more about how women are treated, and tea ladies on the side of the road, and the illustrations, the pictures that she has included in the book, the stories about the different people that worked on her team. And as somebody, I think Lisa already mentioned, somebody mentioned all the steps that they had to undergo to print some of these different books that they prepared, just opened my eyes to so much that I hadn't been exposed to before, and helping me to understand a little bit better about what life is like on the other side of the world. And knowing Leoma and knowing her heart for the Bible, um, it's it's just been so impressive to me, and I consider it a privilege to know her and to get to read this book. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. 33 years ago, I was working as the secretary in our missions department. And at the time, the church supported a large number of foreign missionaries. And of course, back then, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have computers, no electronic community equipment like we have today. And we received all of our mission letters from our missionaries by U.S. mail. And we got several every day. And our missions director would answer each of these letters personally to our missionaries. And they would write us telling us what was going on in their lives, what prayer requests they had, just sharing with us their everyday life. And the mission director would spend an entire day dictating letters. And I would come in the next day and type all those letters, listen to the dictation, and type the letters on a typewriter, not a computer. And this is how I got to know Leoma. I would read all the letters that the missionaries wrote and then type the responses. And before I ever met her in person, I met her through the correspondence. And one day I was reading one of her letters, and she mentioned how tired she and her colleagues were, and how nice it would be to have someone come for a couple of weeks to help them get caught up. And she described the hardships and the challenges, and I just knew that I was the one. I knew I was supposed to go, and I did. You can read more about my experiences in the book, but I'll tell you that I was young. I had never been out of the country or flown. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea even where Khartoum was or anything about it, but here I went, not knowing that it would be a trip that would forever change my life and the way I viewed missions. I thank you for this discussion and just the many experiences that you read about in the book, or just getting to know Leoma. And I know that you might have some questions you want to ask Leoma. My question to you, Leoma, would be, when you first answered the call to go, did you have any idea what you were getting into?
Not a clue. Not a clue.
And when did you discover that? When you landed?
Well, I mean, even when I just first hit Africa, I mean, everything was so different. and then to get into Khartoum, and oh yeah, okay. And really, I have to say that had I known what I was getting into, I probably wouldn't have gone. But I did know that God had called me to do this. And so it wasn't how I planned my life, but God had it planned. And as I needed skills and inspiration and encouragement and whatever, I think God provided that. And it made it possible to accept whatever was there. I mean, you're there, you got to do something. I mean, I did know of people who came in on the plane and were gone in 3 days because they didn't want to work with Black people. I don't know where they thought they were coming, but
I did know the people were Black. One thing I knew.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a huge learning experience. And I think if people ask, would I do it again? Yes. I can't think of any way I would rather spend my life than having done what I've done. And when I look back on it, it's just amazing to me. And I think that was me. Because I'm basically a little, I was raised in a very cottoned world. I mean, my parents liked to, Harriet was the one who tormented me, but everybody else took good care of me. And then suddenly there I was out in the middle of, you know, crawling around in sewers and trying to get door handles out of the sewer. And so I just have to give thanks to God, because that's how I did it.
Great. Does anybody else have a question that you would like to ask Leoma about the book or about her time there in Khartoum?
Ask a question,
Okay.
if I may, because I was so amazed. On one page, you had a list that you made a priority of all the things that you were supposed to do in a particular day. And I just wondered, how did you ever prioritize that list? And did you ever get even 2/3 of it done?
Well, probably not in the same day. When we first went, when Janice and I first went, we could sit around at different times and do cross stitch and, you know, listen to music or do, you know, relaxing things in the evening. But the longer we were there, the more work began to kind of take over. And we ditched the cross stitch, and we, you know, I did finally get a television and a video player so that I would relax and stop working. But right before I left in 2004, I finally learned how to listen to God. And so in the mornings, I would say, okay, what am I supposed to do today? What's on your list? And he would give me a list. And as long as I did his list first, everything got done. And sometimes the list was short, sometimes the list was long. If it was a short list day, I would think, and then I could do, and start thinking of these other things that I could do. But what I didn't know was there would be somebody who came by who needed to talk or to get money or to something that would take up the rest of that time. And there was no time for my list. And on long list days, and I would think, I'm never going to get through all this. And yet it all happened. And I was always amazed one time I was supposed to be writing a linguistic paper, and I thought this is going to take for hours. And I opened it up, and basically it was already written, and I don't remember doing that.
Wow.
So that's pretty good.
That's wonderful.
So as long as I remembered to do God's list first, then I was okay.
I love that advice because I live that way today, even at 88.
Yeah.
And that's really, really helpful. Yeah. And I loved your section on communication and the difficulties of that. It was such fun to read when you were describing the difficulty of trying to explain and understand what birds some of these tribal people were trying to describe to you, and especially the one who was asking you about a large bird, and you supplied a book with pictures of birds and would ask them whether it was big or small. And then to end up having been told by them at the very end of your time that it was a mythical bird. It wasn't a real one at all. Those kinds of communication problems with people, and about the dates and having a calendar when you were trying to help them set up a calendar and they wanted your help, but they have, a 28-day calendar or a 30-day calendar like the Muslims, or the lunar calendar like the Chinese. And it was just remarkable that you were so patient with them and could describe it so well, so that we could put ourselves in that situation and identify and laugh with you about the difficulties of communicating with other people. And that's a help in any situation, because I think even here in the United States, if you read the book, you recognize that we all struggle sometimes with communication with people who've had very different backgrounds from ourselves. I know my move from Chattanooga to the West Coast was traumatic for me because the thinking of the general population is so very different. And it was something to have to learn. And you did it so well and described it with such humor. Thank you so much.
Again, we're discussing Life in a Tumble Dryer. If you are watching this or had just joined us, the book can be purchased at Amazon.com, at bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, or just ask for it in your favorite independent bookstore. The publisher is going to have the ebook on sale for 99 cents the weekend of March the 28th through the 30th. You can find Leoma's books on her website, which is www.leomasbooks.com. Anybody else got a question for Leoma? Or a comment?
As you were writing through it, did you find little themes that you kept on going with, or did you have those planned out before you started writing?
I think I discovered them as I went. This particular book, I tried to do more in date order, whereas in the first book it was more incident driven, I think.
Right, topical or something, yeah.
Yeah. And but I determined at the beginning when I was writing this that if anybody was the idiot, it was me. Because it's their country and that's the way they live. And I'm the one that's out of sync with with them. And so I didn't want to write anything that would be offensive. There was a story in this book that somebody did find very offensive in the way I put it. And so I always show people what I've written before it comes out so that they have the opportunity to interact with it and either agree or disagree. And so I was able to rewrite that in a way that was more acceptable. and didn't show them in a bad light. You never know what is going to be offensive in another culture. I mean, we at one point were giving out Christmas presents, and they were all the same. And so I would just randomly hand out a bag of sweets and maybe some clothes or something to the guys that we worked with. And I was advised not to do it that way. I was advised to put them all in a tray and let them choose which one they would take.
Mm.
And then if they wanted to exchange something, they would feel free to do that. How would I know that? Because somehow they would assume that I had chosen this for them and not for somebody else. And so by letting them choose their own, that eliminated that problem. What? Who would have thought of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I remember one time being someplace and I later wrote that I'd never been so cold in all my life. I mean, I had to put on every bit of clothing that was in my entire suitcase, But someone later saw that blog post and was really offended by that comment. And it was, with the surroundings, everything was lovely. But yeah, I can understand that.
Mm.
So in other words, but you were trying to keep a chronological order more
Yes,
this
in
time.
this one.
Okay.
Which was helped by having these letters that I could
Yeah.
flip
I love
through.
the story about gifts because, yes, in China too, you were supposed to use two hands to pass over a gift. You can't just do it with one hand and pass on something. It has to be meaningful. And I didn't know that at first either when I went there. So those are the things you learn by mistakes, that people are very forgiving. Yes.
Yeah, like don't use your left hand.
Never. I think that, speaking of all that, I like the sensitivity in your book. You're very sensitive to their cultures and the customs, and there's no judgment. That's what I love, is that you're giving a very honest recollection of what happened. And, and I'm surprised that there was one thing that somebody found offensive, because now I'm wondering what it was, because I feel like you did put a lot of thought into how you were telling the stories so as not to offend anyone, so I like that. But I guess my question to you is, as you were going back, because like you were saying, thank goodness for the letters, because it was, would strike a memory. Is there anything that you came across that you were like, oh my God, I don't know how I endured? Like, why didn't I leave at that moment? Was there anything that you had forgotten about until you saw it in the letters?
Yeah, actually, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I do remember that as I read that, I thought, oh dear, I'm glad that didn't happen to me. And I thought, but that did happen to me. I'm like, oh dear.
I remember a comment that you made after doing your first book about Every Day But Not Some. And it was a huge book. And your comment was, I didn't remember that every time I traveled, I got sick. And I was sick all the time. And I didn't remember that. And it was every time it was, you went on one of these expeditions out to wherever you were going.
Yeah.
And so the memory is so specific to what, I don't know, like you said, it's fortunate you had the letters, because they help you remember those things that perhaps you would just as soon have forgotten, that they were so hard.
It might have explained why my parents were more worried about me than I was about myself, as I didn't realize that I was either coming down with something or had something or was just getting over something. And almost every letter.
Yeah. I will say this, the one theme that I saw going through this book and the other book was the fact that you were very aware that it was not your language, it was not your culture, and that ultimately the people you were working with had to make the decisions about what to do and how to do it. And I think that was I think that's a pretty rare gift, because I know that when I'm engaged in teaching people or working with people, I tend to think I know the best way to do it. I think that's the human. Well, this is the way I do it. So obviously I wouldn't do this way if it weren't the best way to do it, right? This is a very common human characteristic. And yet you were able to step out of that through probably, you talked about a humbling moment when at the very beginning about being hauled up by someone saying, this is not your language.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you mentioned that in the book, and it shows throughout. You really took that comment to heart, as I would say, and it was kind of the guiding principle. And consequently, when you left, and I hate to say this because really I'm not going to be able to live with you. Your head's going to get so big. But when you left that country, you had how many different languages that were being worked on by the people themselves because they had learned how to do linguistics in the classes in the program you set up, and is still ongoing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a lifetime legacy that started in a tumble dryer.
Yes.
Leoma, you mentioned your parents. What was it like to tell your parents that you were going?
Well, I, of course, was very excited. And I tried to explain my whole grammar course that I just spent 12 or 15 weeks learning to my mother in about an hour. And she was looking a bit. They decided that they would, I think mother could see that I'd had a calling, and she had dedicated me to the Lord when I was little. So I think she was pleased that I was going. My dad, not so much. But he decided that he was not going to say anything negative. He wasn't going to say, don't go, which when I think back of what it must have been like for them when I left them at the airport and got on that plane, they never talked about that. They didn't cry when I was there, but I'm sure they did after I left.
Some of your cat stories, Leoma. How did you happen to come by these cats? And
Well, somebody, I think one of my colleagues had a cat that had kittens. And they wanted to get rid of the kittens. And so we said we would take one. And they said, well, that one will get lonely. You need to take the other one to keep it company. And that's how we ended up with Zadig and Garang. And since the Shilluk always seemed to name animals and sometimes people after events and people and things, Sadiq al-Mahdi was the president at the time we got them, and Garang, Colonel John Garang de Maubior, was the leader of the Southern opposition and the rebel movement. And so this was our effort toward the peace agreement, we would tell people. and at one point we had a third cat show up who was just really obnoxious, would try to scratch you if you tried to feed it, and it would scratch you if you took the food away, and it would leap out from under the couch and scratch you just because you walked by. And so we named him Omar al-Bashir. But we got rid of him pretty quick. But yeah, it was interesting to know how they named people, and how they used singing songs about people to control behavior. So if you did something that was unacceptable, they would make up a song about you and then sing it at the dances and whatever, and it often caused fights with the family. So yeah, the cats really kind of kept us, well, I don't know if we kept them in line or they kept us in line, but anyway, it worked together.
And the story about the cat communicating with the bird, I think
Oh,
you told us that story.
yeah, it was so funny. She'd get out there and she'd go, and the bird would cheep, 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 cheep. Anyway. And finally the bird would come down to see whatever they, whatever she'd promised that she could play, and then she would eat it.
Oh.
And I saw the other one, that was Garang. No, that was Sadiq. Garang, I saw her try that a time or two, but she obviously didn't have the language down well. And so she just caught birds the normal way.
Well, I think this has been a great book launch. And I'm so excited for people to be able to go out and purchase your book. And so I just remind you that you can go to Amazon.com, bookshop.org, Barnes and Noble, ask for it in your favorite independent bookstore. And remember that you can get it for 99 cents this weekend.
The ebook.
March 28th through 30th, ebook. And the publisher is taking care of that. I want to thank those who have joined us, our guests today. Y'all have done a great job. We appreciate you. And it's so good to hear how each person knows Leoma and the things that meant so much to you from the book. And I would just encourage those that are watching this to visit Leoma's website, leomasbooks.com. And she also has a newsletter. Leoma, how can they get on the list to get your newsletter?
Well, on the website, there are a couple places, one in a side panel, one at the bottom that says if you would like to get a gift and then sign up for my newsletter. I promise to only send it out once a month. I will not inundate you with tons of emails that you don't want. But it is a good way to keep up with what's going on in the latest plans for writing. And I'd love to get feedback from you as to what you've enjoyed, what you would like to know. Just I've got a lot of books in my head. Maybe you can help me figure out which one should be the next one.
Well, thanks to all of you for being part of this incredible launch. And until next time, we'll just say happy reading.